You feel it, don't you? That quiet ache beneath the surface. A weight you've carried for so long, you've forgotten what it feels like to walk without it. You smile when you're supposed to agree. When it's easier, say yes when everything inside you is screaming no, and they call you good, kind, polite. But deep down, something feels wrong, because no matter how much you give it, never seems to be enough, no matter how much you bend the world. Asks you to break just a little more. You've been taught that being a good person means being selfless, agreeable, soft. But what if that's not goodness at all? What if that's just fear in disguise? In this video, we are not here to glorify cruelty or power for its own sake. We are here to strip away the illusion, to expose the shadow behind the smile, to question everything you've been told about morality, worth, and identity. Because being good is not the same as being whole, and until you face what you've buried, your rage, your truth, your untamed soul, you will never be free. This is not a motivational speech. This is a descent, a journey into the unconscious. And if you have the courage to keep listening, you may finally understand why the mask of the good person has been suffocating you all along. Now let us begin. You were not born to be liked. You were not summoned into existence to be agreeable, digestible, or palatable to a world addicted to masks and illusions. And yet, from your earliest days, you were taught, sometimes with smiles, sometimes with silence, that being a good person meant making yourself smaller. You were handed a script passed down through generations of quiet suffering that told you your worth was found in obedience, your value in being needed, your virtue in vanishing your own needs for the comfort of others. But beneath the surface of this polished image, something ancient stirs, something tired of nodding, something exhausted from smiling while it bleeds. It is the self buried beneath layers of performance, suppressed beneath the weight of a persona, crafted not by your soul, but by your fear. The idea of the good person is a myth, not because goodness is false, but because the version you were sold was a weapon, a way to control, to domesticate, to sterilize the wildness within you. You were taught that anger is bad, that boundaries are selfish, that saying no makes you difficult, and that difficulty makes you unlovable. But Jung knew what many still fear to admit. The shadow does not disappear when ignored. It grows teeth in the silence. It learns to wear your smile. It slips behind your eyes and performs politeness while seething with resentment. And you, trying so hard to be good, become haunted by everything you repress. You do not become holy by cutting yourself into pieces for the altar of acceptance. You become hollow. You see the unconscious never forgets. Every suppressed truth, every silent scream, every swallowed grief, these do not vanish. They descend. They descend into the depths of your psyche, where they take root as the shadow, forming an unseen twin, made of all that you rejected to survive. And here is the irony. The world applauds your mask. They love your inoffensiveness, your perpetual agreement, your silence, your exhaustion. Because as long as you are good by their definition, you are controllable, harmless, safe. But to be safe in this way is to be spiritually asleep. And eventually you will wake up in a life that is not your own, surrounded by people who praise a version of you that does not exist. The persona, Jung said, is a mask we wear to face society, necessary, yes, but dangerous. When mistaken for the self, it is the diplomat of our psyche negotiating our place in the world. But when you become the mask, when you confuse performance with presence, you lose the aliveness of your essence. You become a ghost, with a painted face bowing to social expectations while your soul withers beneath the weight of perpetual self-denial. And the longer you wear the mask, the more terrified you become of what lies beneath it. You begin to believe that your rage is evil, your desire is wrong, your defiance is sin. But these things are not evil. They are power waiting to be claimed. What does it mean to be a good person if your goodness is born from fear? If your compassion is a disguise for codependency? If your empathy is a shield that protects you from the terror of rejection? So many of us were not taught virtue. We were taught survival strategies masquerading as morals. We were taught to please, to adapt, to soften our truths so others could stay comfortable. But real goodness, true conscious goodness, is forged in fire. It does not shrink to fit inside expectations. It does not betray the self in the name of false harmony. It stands firm. It says no when necessary. It rages when injustice appears. It withdraws when boundaries are crossed. It loves deeply, but not blindly. And above all, it is rooted in truth, not approval. You cannot be whole until you are honest. And honesty requires that you confront the parts of yourself that do not fit the image, the anger, the pride, the desire to be seen, to be heard, to be powerful. These are not flaws. They are facets of your humanity. Archetypes rising from the depths of the psyche to challenge the tyranny of suppression. The warrior who says enough, the trickster who laughs at the absurdity of self-denial, the outcast who walks alone rather than live as a lie. These figures live within you, waiting to be remembered, not as enemies of your goodness, but as its guardians, because goodness without power is fragility, and power without soul is tyranny. But when you unite them, when the heart and the spine move as one, you become something sacred, integrated. And integration is not clean. It is not beautiful in the way the world demands. It is messy, chaotic, raw. It is a descent into the underworld like Inanna stripped naked before the gates. It is Orpheus, losing everything for a glimpse of the eternal. It is Persephone, becoming queen of the very darkness that once imprisoned her. The unconscious must be entered like a labyrinth, willingly, humbly, because what you meet there is not evil. It is unlived life, every part of you left behind to be good, every truth you buried beneath a smile, every scream you turned into silence. They are still there, and they are not waiting for you to punish them. They are waiting to be heard. Do not confuse obedience with virtue. Do not mistake agreement for integrity. There are times when the most moral thing you can do is to say no, to walk away, to set fire to the mask you've been forced to wear. Jung called this the process of individuation, and the becoming of the whole self, not the pleasing self, not the polite self, but the totality of your being. And individuation is not a path for cowards. It is a return to your roots. Not the roots planted by others, but the ones that grew in your blood. It is a remembering that your soul was never meant to be tamed. You are not here to be liked. You are here to be real. The shadow you call kindness. You were praised for your gentleness, applauded for your compliance, rewarded for staying quiet when your soul screamed for thunder. They called you kind when you made yourself small, called you mature when you swallowed your fury, called you good when you erased yourself for their comfort. But what if I told you that the face you've worn, the smiling, nodding, endlessly understanding mask, is not a sign of virtue, but of abandonment, not of love, but of fear, and that deep within the softness they admire lies something ancient, burning, and buried. You were not born to be a mirror for the needs of others. You were not born to be a hollow shell molded by expectation. And yet here you are, aching beneath the surface, afraid to speak the truth of who you are. Because to be real might mean to be rejected. To be honest might mean to be alone. So you call it kindness, but your soul knows it as submission. Beneath the polished surface of the good person is a battlefield. A war between the persona and the self, between the voice that longs to scream and the voice that whispers, "Be nice." Jung warned us the persona is not the self. It is a mask, a social adaptation, a tool to survive among others. But when that mask fuses with your identity, when it becomes all you show to the world, you begin to forget the sound of your own voice. You begin to believe that your worth lies in how well you can suppress yourself. Your pain becomes an offering. Your silence becomes a virtue. Your boundaries dissolve into mist, and the world claps. Because they are not applauding your kindness, they are applauding your control, your predictability, your absence. But the psyche keeps score. The unconscious does not forget the truth. Every time you silence your needs, a shadow is formed. Every time you deny your anger, your grief, your longing, a part of you is exiled. These rejected pieces do not die. They descend, they fall into the abyss of your unconscious and become the shadow. And the shadow is not evil. It is unlived life. It is truth buried in shame. It is power strangled in the cradle of politeness. And the longer you ignore it, the more it takes control. You may think you are being kind, but the shadow keeps tally. You think you are forgiving, but beneath that forgiveness is rage with no name. You give and give and give, and call it love. But it is fear of being abandoned that drives you. Fear of conflict, fear of being called selfish, fear of not being good. But what is goodness if it demands you disappear? What is kindness if it asks you to lie? The most dangerous shadow is the one you believe is light. The smile that hides resentment, the helping hand that shakes with exhaustion, the voice that comforts others but has never spoken its own truth. You have been trained to believe that these things make you noble. But nobility is not found in self-erasure. It is found in truth, in wholeness, in courage. Real kindness is not the avoidance of conflict. It is the ability to face conflict with integrity. Real goodness is not blind. Giving it is conscious, sacred, chosen giving. But that kind of goodness requires a soul strong enough to say no, to walk away, to draw a line in the sand and say, "I will not betray myself for your approval." In the myths of every ancient culture, the hero must descend into the underworld, into the cave, into the belly of the beast. This is not symbolic. It is psychological, because the journey toward wholeness always begins in darkness. You cannot find yourself in the light of consensus. You find it in the silence of rejection, in the stillness after the mask has shattered, in the sobs that rise when you finally say the thing you've been too afraid to say. Jung called this process individuation, the integration of the conscious and unconscious, the union of opposites, the birth of the true self. And it always begins with the shadow. To meet your shadow is not to become cruel. It is to become whole, to reclaim the pieces of you that were called too much, too loud, too sensitive, too angry, too honest. These were never flaws. They were flames, and someone was afraid of your fire. So they taught you to put it out. But you are not here to flicker. You are here to burn. Not in destruction, but in clarity. Not in vengeance, but in vitality. Because when you reclaim your shadow, your kindness becomes conscious. It is no longer a performance. It is no longer a shield. It is no longer an unconscious strategy for belonging. It is a gift freely given, never extracted. You must ask yourself, Who taught you that to be loved, you must be small? Who taught you that your needs are a burden, that your anger is a sin, that your voice is dangerous? These were not truths. These were wounds passed down like heirlooms. Generations of women taught to be quiet. Generations of men taught to be stoic. Children punished for crying. Lovers shamed for feeling. But you have a choice. You can continue the lineage of silence, or you can become the rupture, the break in the chain, the one who turns inward and says, I will no longer betray my soul for the illusion of safety. It will cost you. Make no mistake, the journey to reclaim the self is not easy. You will lose people. You will be misunderstood. You will feel the ache of isolation. But there is something far more dangerous than rejection, and the quiet despair of never having lived your truth. The quiet death of a life spent performing. You were not born to be digestible. You were born to be divine. And divinity is not always polite. Sometimes it is thunder. Sometimes it is fire. Sometimes it is the silence that will no longer accommodate lies. Why they use you, the dark side of pleasing. You've always been the one who gives a little more, the one who listens a little longer, stays a little later, smiles even when it hurts. Somewhere along the way, you learned that love is earned through sacrifice, that to be accepted, you must first become useful, agreeable, easy to be around. So you adapted. You became what others needed. Reliable, generous, unthreatening. You learned to keep the peace, to avoid the hard conversations, to dissolve your needs before they could inconvenience anyone. And the world rewarded you for a time. They called you kind, humble, selfless. But beneath those compliments lives a deeper truth. They use you. Not out of cruelty, but because you made yourself easy to use. Because your fear of disapproval ran deeper than your desire for authenticity. And now you find yourself exhausted, bitter, unseen, wondering why the more you give, the more they take. Why the softer you become, the harder the world presses down. You were not born to be agreeable. You were born whole. But somewhere in your early years, you learned a dangerous lesson that safety came not from being real, but from being liked. That love was conditional, and those conditions were obedience, compliance, emotional containment. And so your psyche split. The self retreated into the shadows, and the persona stepped forward. You're the mask you wear to keep peace, to win love, to survive. Jung called the persona a necessary tool, a way of being seen by the world. But when the mask hardens, when the role becomes your identity, you begin to live a life that is not yours. You become a reflection of what others need, not a revelation of who you truly are. You are praised not for your presence, but for your absence. Your absence of need of confrontation, of individuality. And beneath that praise, your soul begins to wither. The unconscious remembers every time you say yes when you mean no. A seed of resentment is planted every time you silence your truth to keep the peace. The shadow grows stronger because what you repress does not disappear. It returns. It returns as anxiety, depression, exhaustion. It returns as bitterness you can't explain. It returns in your dreams, in your outbursts, in your inexplicable sense that something vital is missing. You have traded authenticity for acceptance, and now the emptiness has grown too loud to ignore. But this is not the end. This is the beginning. The moment the soul begins to stir, the moment the mask begins to crack, the moment you ask the question no one wants to answer. Who am I when I stop trying to please? You are not kind. You are terrified. You are not generous. You are starving. You are not selfless. You are afraid to be seen as selfish. This is not judgment. It is revelation. Because only when you name the truth can you begin to heal. Your kindness is not wrong, but it is incomplete. Because it is not rooted in wholeness, it is rooted in fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of being told that your true self is too much, too angry, too messy, too alive. And that fear keeps you caged. You call it compassion, but it's captivity. You call it virtue, but it's self-betrayal. And the world will continue to take as long as you continue to offer what you do not have. The archetype of the caregiver is noble, but when it is distorted by the wounded child within, it becomes martyrdom. The wounded child who believes love must be earned through sacrifice, that boundaries are dangerous, that presence must be paid for with performance. But the true self does not bargain for love. The true self does not ask for permission to exist. It simply is whole, radiant, non-negotiable. And the path to that self, of the path of individuation, begins when you stop abandoning yourself in the name of being liked. This is the hero's journey. Not across distant lands, but into the shadow, into the forgotten rooms of the soul, into the places you've sealed off with politeness and people-pleasing. You will not find yourself in approval. You will not find your voice in consensus. You will find it in solitude, in confrontation, in the terrifying beauty of standing alone, undiluted, unapologetic. The shadow you fear is not here to destroy you. It is here to restore you, to return the pieces you gave away to survive. And yes, it will be painful. You will grieve the mask. You will mourn the roles you can no longer play. But in their place, something true will rise, something untouchable. The anima and animus, your inner feminine and masculine, will return from exile, no longer split between nurturing others and neglecting yourself, no longer polarized between softness and strength. They will marry within you. The masculine will speak with clarity, the feminine will feel with depth, and together they will guard the temple of your truth. This is inner alchemy, the transformation of fear into power, of silence into song. But it requires that you stop seeking permission, that you stop calling it virtue to disappear, that you stop performing love in the hope of being loved. Real love does not demand your diminishment. It does not require you to shrink to silence, to serve at the expense of your soul. Real love, whether from others or from yourself, says, I see you. Not the mask, not the performance, but you whole, unfiltered. And if someone cannot love that, then let them go. Let the world that only wants your usefulness fall away. Because it is better to walk alone in truth than to be surrounded in lies. It is better to disappoint others than to abandon yourself. You were not made to be pleasing. You were made to be real. How to stop being manipulated and start being respected. You want to be respected, but you've spent your life trying to be liked. You've mistaken politeness for power, silence for wisdom, and being agreeable for being strong. And now beneath the surface of your carefully curated life, something trembles, a quiet, aching rage. A voice that has been silenced for so long, it has forgotten how to speak without apology. You've said yes when you meant no. You've bent until your spine ached, only to find that those who take never stop taking. And in that invisible transaction between your fear of rejection and their hunger for control, you disappeared. You call it kindness, you call it empathy. But deep down, you know you've been manipulated, not just by others, but by your own conditioning. Because the truth no one dares say is this: the world does not respect the selfless. The world respects the sovereign. Respect begins the moment you stop betraying yourself. And to stop betraying yourself, you must first remember who you are beneath the mask. Jung called it the persona. The social face we wear to meet the world, it is a necessary fiction, a survival tool. But when the mask becomes fused to the flesh, when the role becomes your identity, you lose the thread of your own truth. You become an actor in someone else's story, scripted by expectation, choreographed by fear. And this is where manipulation begins, not with the narcissist, not with the abuser, not with the liar, but with your unconscious willingness to be shaped. You cannot be manipulated unless some part of you believes it must submit to be loved. And that belief was not born in adulthood. It was carved into you in childhood. The child who learns that love is earned through performance, that approval is conditional on silence, that safety comes from being easy to manage. This child grows into an adult who calls self-erasure being a good person, who confuses guilt with morality, who thinks saying no is a sin. But the psyche remembers, the unconscious keeps score. And every time you bend to avoid confrontation, you teach the world that your boundaries are negotiable, that your truth is flexible, that your worth can be bargained for. But this is not respect. This is spiritual poverty. And the only way out is through the fire of radical self-confrontation. You must unearth the belief that made you manipulable. You must look into the mirror and see not the pleaser, not the martyr, not the saint, but the lion, the storm, the sovereign soul, who will no longer bow to fear. People manipulate because they can, because somewhere in you there is an opening, a wound, a fracture, a forgotten promise to never upset the waters. And they sense it, consciously or not. They test your limits, push your edges, tighten the leash. And if you do not resist, they learn. They learn that you will fold, that you will explain, justify, make excuses. They learn that your yes is automatic, that your no is soft, that your silence can be bought with just enough guilt or praise. And this is how it happens, not in dramatic betrayals, but in the slow erosion of yourself, until one day you realize that your life has been hijacked by the expectations of others, and you let it happen thinking it was love. But real love does not require your submission. Real connection does not demand your obedience. The people who truly see you, who truly value you, do not need you to be silent, compliant, convenient. They need you to be whole. And wholeness requires boundaries, the word no spoken without explanation, the ability to walk away without guilt, the willingness to risk being misunderstood rather than betray yourself. This is not cruelty, this is clarity. And clarity is the beginning of respect. The unconscious is not the enemy, it is the key. Because buried within it are the archetypes, the ancient, eternal energies that shape the human soul. And among them is the warrior, not the destroyer, but the defender, the aspect of your psyche that says, this is my space, this is my truth, this is my soul, and it is not for sale. The warrior is not angry, but alert, not violent, but immovable. When the warrior awakens, you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop negotiating with manipulators. You stop leaking your energy into relationships that feed on your fear of abandonment. And for the first time, you feel what it means to be whole. But to awaken the warrior, you must pass through the shadow, through the parts of you that enjoy being needed, even if it means being used. The part that mistakes pity for love. The part that fears solitude more than self-betrayal. These are not flaws, they are wounds. But wounds unattended become entry points for manipulation. You must confront the inner saboteur. The voice that says, just give in. Keep the peace. Don't rock the boat. You must look it in the eye and say, no more. Because your life is not a peace treaty. Your soul is not a transaction. Your presence is not a convenience. Respect is not granted. It is cultivated through boundaries, through embodiment, through unshakable self-regard. And that begins with ending the performance, with retiring the mask, with standing in the ruins of your old identity, and building something truer, stronger, sacred. Not everyone will like the new you. That is the cost of liberation. But those who remain, those who see the fire in your eyes and do not flinch, those are your people. And more importantly, you become your own person. No longer a puppet, no longer a pawn, but a soul on fire, with its own truth, in the jungle of souls. Kindness is prey. There is a moment silent and unseen when your soul begins to whisper that something is wrong. Not in the world around you, but in the way you've learned to survive it. You've been told that to be good is to be kind, that kindness is the highest virtue, that gentleness and selflessness are the path to belonging. And so you gave your time, your energy, your truth, your voice. You gave until there was barely anything left to give. But in the jungle of souls, kindness, without strength, is prey. It is not respected, it is consumed. And those who wear the mask of civility will eat you slowly with compliments and silence, with guilt and praise, until you no longer remember where you end and they begin, because kindness, without boundaries, becomes a wound waiting to be opened. And in a world ruled by unconscious games of power, that wound is a beacon. You have been taught to fear your own power, to see your assertiveness as arrogance, your anger as sin, your boundaries as rejection. You have been trained sometimes without a word to smile, while being devoured, to call it grace, when you are torn apart by the demands of others. But Jung knew, as all mystics have known, no transformation begins in safety. The soul does not awaken through obedience. It awakens through rupture, through the shattering of the false self, through the confrontation with the beast in the mirror. And if you continue to choose kindness at the expense of your truth, if you continue to confuse meekness with morality, you will remain food for the shadows that roam the psyche of those who feed on the light of others. You think you are being good, but what if I told you that the version of kindness you live is not kindness at all, that it is fear dressed as a virtue, silence disguised as love, self-abandonment sold as empathy? The unconscious remembers every time you said yes when you meant no, every time you avoided the truth to avoid discomfort, every time you turned away from your own voice to be accepted. These moments accumulate not just in your body, but in your soul. They become the shadow, the reservoir of everything you repress to remain palatable. And the more you repress, the more you attract those who sense it. The predator does not seek the strong. It seeks the compliant, the pleasing, the kind without fire. It seeks the one who will not fight back. But there is another part of you buried beneath layers of performance and politeness that remembers. It remembers how to snarl, how to rise, how to say, "This is mine, and I will not give it away." This part is not evil. It is sacred. It is the guardian of your wholeness, the fierce protector of your dignity. Jung called it the shadow, but it is not darkness. It is power. And power, when integrated, becomes presence. The kind of presence that no longer explains, no longer apologizes, no longer asks for permission to exist. The kind of presence that walks through the jungle of souls not as prey, but as one who has remembered their own name. We do not reclaim ourselves by denying the world. We reclaim ourselves by entering it fully with eyes open and spine straight. To walk through this life awake is to know that some will take if you let them, that not every hand extended toward you comes in peace. It is to know that goodness, if not chosen consciously, becomes a strategy of survival that eats you from the inside out The archetypes whisper this in every myth. The hero does not triumph by being nice. The goddess does not ascend by pleasing everyone. The magician does not awaken by staying safe. They all descend. They all face betrayal, confusion, isolation. And it is in that descent that they find the gold, the truth beneath the roles they were forced to play. The world is not waiting for your perfection. It is starving for your authenticity, for the wild truth you've buried under years of conditioning, for the roar inside you that has been mistaken for wrongness, the voice that says, enough of swallowing your intuition, enough of dancing for crumbs of approval, enough of offering your soul to be digested by people who call your boundaries inconvenient. You were not meant to be devoured. You were meant to stand not above others, but within yourself, anchored, awake, and whole. There is a cost to awakening. You will disappoint those who loved your mask. You will grieve the loss of being liked by those who only liked your silence. But that grief is holy. It is the ashes from which your self is born. And in its place grows something unshakable, a rootedness that no longer needs to please, perform, or prove. A rootedness that does not mistake softness for surrender, that understands kindness is not a weapon to be used against yourself, but a choice, a sovereign conscious choice, given only when it honors your soul. The mask of virtue. How they control you. You were not born wearing a mask. You came into this world whole, untamed, radiant with instinct and wonder. You cried when you were hungry. You roared when something hurt. You reached for what you loved with the reckless grace of one who does not yet know shame. But slowly, piece by piece, that raw truth was shaved away. Not because the world is cruel, but because it is terrified of what cannot be controlled. And so it handed you a mask, a porcelain smile painted with words like good, nice, humble, obedient. You learned quickly that certain parts of you must be hidden to be loved. Your fire became too loud, your sadness too inconvenient, your rage too dangerous. So you covered it, smothered it, smiled over it, and they applauded, and they called you virtuous, but it wasn't virtue. It was control. You were being rewarded for disappearing. They never had to cage you. They simply convinced you that freedom was wrong, that real goodness was silence, that real strength was self-denial, that true virtue was to bleed for others without ever asking to be seen. And you believed them because you wanted to belong, because the fear of rejection runs deeper than logic. And so you became an actor in a play. You didn't write mouthing lines that made others comfortable wearing a mask so well it almost felt like your skin. But beneath that mask, the self was not dead. It was sleeping, waiting, listening, watching as the lie grew louder and the soul grew quieter. Because the psyche knows. The unconscious always knows when we have abandoned our truth in the name of being good. Jung spoke of the persona not as a flaw, but as a necessary illusion. A social face, a way of existing within the world's expectations. But he also warned that when the persona becomes fused with identity, the soul begins to rot in silence. And that's what happened. You stopped knowing where the mask ended and where you began. You started to confuse performance with presence, approval with love, guilt with morality. And so the world kept shaping you, bending you, rewarding your obedience, while stealing your essence. Not through violence, through flattery, through praise, through applause, for how easy you were to manage. But every time you said yes when your body screamed no, every time you swallowed your truth to maintain peace, every time you apologized for existing too loudly, something sacred within you was exiled. This is how control works, not through force, but through conditioning, not through punishment, but through reward. And the most dangerous chains are the ones that look like virtues. Humility becomes self-erasure. Patience becomes tolerance for abuse. Forgiveness becomes a refusal to feel rage. And the world calls this enlightenment. But it is not wholeness. It is fragmentation dressed in spiritual clothing. The unconscious does not care what others think of you. It cares only for what is real, and it will not rest until the mask cracks and the shadow rises, the shadow, the living grave of all you were told not to be. The parts of you deemed unworthy, unlovable, unacceptable. These do not die, they fester. They whisper in your dream. They erupt in moments of unexplained rage, jealousy, sadness. They sabotage your relationships, your voice, your clarity. Not because they hate you, but because they long to be seen. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your exiled twin, and it holds the key to your freedom. Freedom begins the moment you question the virtue you've been performing. When you stop asking how to be good and start asking how to be whole. Because wholeness is not clean, it is not polite. It does not always fit inside the roles you were assigned. It screams when screaming is truth. It weeps when others expect you to smile. It says no without explanation. It walks away without guilt. This is not rebellion for its own sake. It is the return of the self. The lion awakening in the lamb, the warrior beneath the servant. The soul remembering it was never meant to be domesticated. You have been controlled by the fear of being seen as wrong, as selfish, as angry, as too much. But these fears were planted in you to keep you manageable. And now it is time to burn them, to hold your own hand as you walk into the fire of transformation. To look into the mirror, past the smile, past the pleasantries, past the performance, and meet the eyes of the one who has been waiting. The real you. The one who knows how to protect what matters. The one who knows that kindness without boundaries is not love. It is surrender. That virtue without awareness is not light. It is a leash. You are not here to be agreeable. You are here to be real, and reality is messy, imperfect, defiant. It does not bow to image. It does not kneel to praise. It does not shrink to fit inside the comforts of those who fear their own truth. To be whole is to be untamed. It is to know when to be still and when to strike, when to offer compassion and when to walk away, when to speak gently and when to roar. And it is only when you reclaim this wild, sacred inner authority that you are free from the control disguised as virtue. The strategic soul. What Jung and Machiavelli agreed on. You were taught that soul and strategy cannot coexist, that the spiritual life is a soft one, the noble path paved only with compassion and surrender. You were told that to be good is to be harmless, that power corrupts, that cunning is cruel, that the strong must be feared, and the meek shall inherit the earth. But you have felt the lie. You have lived it. You have smiled your way through betrayals, lowered your voice to avoid confrontation, given pieces of yourself in the name of virtue, only to find yourself hollow, disrespected, and used. And now you sense what Jung saw and what Machiavelli whispered centuries earlier. The soul that refuses to wield power is a soul that will be controlled. That morality without discernment becomes a weapon turned inward. That to navigate this world with integrity, you must not only carry light, you must know the darkness. You must understand how power works, or you will always be in the hands of those who do. Jung understood the psyche as a vast kingdom, filled with forces both sacred and savage. And Machiavelli, stripped of illusions, understood the world in the same way, a place of masks, motivations and movements beneath the surface. Both men in their own language pointed to the same truth. The naive are devoured, not because they are unworthy, but because they refuse to see the full picture. because they mistake weakness for innocence. Jung did not preach the repression of darkness. He warned that the unintegrated shadow is what corrupts from within. That the more we deny our capacity for ambition, for manipulation, for strength, the more we fall victim to those who have no such illusions. And Machiavelli, though often misunderstood, never glorified cruelty. He simply refused to lie about how power operates. He saw that image matters, that fear is often respected more than goodness, that in a world of wolves, you must learn to be a fox. The truth is, you are not made to grovel. Your soul is not here to be sacrificed on the altar of people-pleasing. You are not here to apologize for your presence, to perform softness until your voice disappears. You are here to become whole. And wholeness includes the shadow. The part of you that sees through masks, the part that senses when words are sweet but motives are bitter, the part that knows when to walk away, not with rage but with clarity. Because power does not always look like domination. Sometimes it is the stillness that cannot be manipulated. Sometimes it is the silence that says, "You will not use me again." That is the strategic soul, not the one who schemes, but the one who sees. Not the one who attacks, but the one who no longer allows invasion. The path of individuation, Jung's great task, is not about becoming nice. It is about becoming real. It is about integrating every part of your being so that you are no longer at war with yourself. The anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine, must be unified. The soft and the sharp, the nurturing and the protective, the forgiving and the fierce. When these opposites are reconciled, you are no longer swayed by flattery or guilt. You do not say yes when you mean no. You do not confuse moral weakness with virtue. You love deeply, but you no longer abandon yourself in the name of love. You forgive, but you no longer tolerate betrayal. You walk with humility, but your spine is steel. Machiavelli said, "It is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both." But what he meant was not cruelty, it was presence. It was consequence. To be feared is to be seen as someone whose boundaries are real, whose silence is not a surrender, but a warning. Jung too spoke of this. The shadow integrated becomes a source of authentic power. When you confront what you are capable of, your darkness, your hunger, your cunning, and you do not act from it, but with it, you become unshakable. This is not the absence of ethics. It is the birth of conscious morality. Morality chosen, not imposed. Morality that sees the full range of the human soul and still chooses to walk in truth. There are forces in this world that feed on those who cannot say no, who mistake empathy for availability, who smell the scent of self-doubt and come close with kind smiles and sharp teeth. And unless you have done the inner work, unless you have faced the part of you that wants to be liked more than it wants to be free, you will be caught in the same cycle again and again. You will call it love. You will call it forgiveness, but it is submission, and your soul will grow colder each time until the mask is all that remains. But there is another way. The strategic soul is not at war with the world. It simply sees the world as it is and chooses wisely. It does not broadcast its truth to those who cannot hold it. It does not open its gates to every traveler. It studies, it waits, it feels, and then it acts, not from impulse, but from inner alignment, not from fear, but from vision. To walk this path is to become mythic again, to remember the old symbols, the serpent wise and watching, the owl silent and seeing the lion gentle until it roars. These are not metaphors. They are energies within you, waiting to be remembered, archetypes of power, of wisdom, of strategy. The king who leads with vision, the queen who protects her realm. the magician who transforms wounds into wisdom. You do not need to become someone else. You only need to remove what was never yours to carry. The guilt, the masks, the fear of being too much, the fear of being not enough. Beneath all of it is the truth of who you are. Vast, clear, burning with life. And when you reclaim that truth, you will no longer be a victim of power games. You will no longer bow to illusions. You will walk through the world not as prey, but as presence. Not seeking permission, but offering truth. That is what Jung and Machiavelli agreed on. Though they spoke in different tongues, the soul must awaken. And once it does, it must not only shine, it must see. Stop trying to be liked. Start being whole. You have spent years contorting yourself into shapes that others find acceptable. You have filtered your voice until it no longer sounds like your own, softened your presence to avoid being seen as threatening, and disguised your truth behind carefully measured words. And for what? A seat at a table where you are only welcome if you stay small. A smile of approval from someone who never knew your soul. You have mistaken belonging for obedience, thinking that to be loved, you must first be pleasing. But in the mirror of your own silence, a deeper ache has grown. Not because you are unloved, but because you are unknown, even to yourself. And now in the quiet hours of your life, something sacred begins to stir. A whisper from beneath the mask, asking not to be liked, but to be real, to be whole. This is the call, the ancient, undeniable pull toward individuation. The summons to step out of the performance and into the truth of your being. The unconscious has been keeping score. Every time you said yes, when you meant no, every time you smiled through pain, every time you betrayed your inner knowing for external peace. The self took note, and not with anger, but with sorrow, because it knows who you are, even when you forget. It knows the fire you buried beneath politeness, the wildness you exiled for approval, the dreams you silenced because they made others uncomfortable. Jung understood that the human soul is not made for uniformity. It is not here to be agreeable. It is here to become, to unfold, to bloom in its own rhythm, in defiance of every mold it was told to fit. And the journey toward this becoming is not paved with applause. It is paved with solitude, with confrontation, with the terrifying beauty of not being understood. It is the hero's journey inward through the underworld of the psyche, past the ruins of false identity, into the sanctuary of the self. You were taught to be liked, not to be whole. From childhood, you were rewarded for compliance, punished for defiance, praised for being good, even when it meant being silent. And so you split. The parts of you that were too loud, too sensitive, too angry, too alive, they were sent into the shadow. Not because they were wrong, but because they made others uncomfortable. And comfort was survival. So you smiled, you adapted, you wore the persona so well. You forgot it was a mask, but the shadow remembers. It holds everything you were told to forget. And it waits not as a threat, but as a key, because wholeness does not come from being good. It comes from being true, from facing the parts of yourself that you've hidden, rejected, feared, from meeting the beast in the mirror and recognizing it as your own reflection. Not to tame it, but to understand it, to listen, to integrate. To stop trying to be liked is not to become cruel. It is to become free. It is to reclaim the energy you have poured into approval and pour it into embodiment. To stop seeking validation in places that only know you as a version of yourself. To be disliked, if necessary, by those who never cared to know you beneath the surface. This is the shedding, the sacred unraveling. And it is terrifying, Because when you let go of being liked, you lose the identity that once kept you safe. But you gain something far greater, the inner authority to no longer need permission to exist, to no longer apologize for your depth, your voice, your sacred fire. You become a soul in motion, moved by truth, not trend. Anchored in presence, not perception, the archetypes awaken in those who dare to be whole. The warrior who sets boundaries not to harm, but to protect the sacred within. The sage who sees through illusion and speaks even when the room goes quiet. The wild woman, the divine child, the inner king, all rising from the ashes of who you were told to be. These are not fantasies. They are living patterns within you, waiting to be embodied. And when you stop performing, you make room for their return. You make space for the self to step forward. Not the curated self, but the primordial self, the one who was never broken, only buried. And from this self comes power, not domination, but sovereignty. Not the power to control others, but the power to no longer be controlled by their expectations. To live from this place is to walk a different path, one that winds through the forest of solitude, over the mountains of discomfort, through the valleys of grief, because you will grieve the version of you that people liked. You will mourn the roles you can no longer play. But on the other side of that, grief is freedom. The kind of freedom that cannot be faked, cannot be bought, cannot be taken. It is the freedom of being able to look in the mirror and say, "This is who I am," without shrinking, without justification, without shame. And when you live from this place, something strange begins to happen. You may be liked less, but you are respected more. You may be understood less, but you are seen more clearly. And you begin to attract not those who want a reflection, but those who want reality. Let the mask fall. Let the need to be liked crumble in your hands. It is not your duty to be palatable. It is not your destiny to be convenient. You were not made to fit. You were made to expand, to grow into the full spectrum of your being. Even if it makes others uncomfortable, even if it means walking alone, because you will not be alone forever. When you walk as yourself, the world will shift. Those who see you, those who know the sound of truth, they will find you. But first, you must find you. Not the you who was molded, but the you who was born. And that journey begins the moment you stop trying to be liked and start being whole. Meet your inner tyrant. You want to be free, but you haven't yet met the part of you that keeps you in chains. You speak of healing, of growth, of light. But somewhere deep in your psyche, hidden beneath your masks of kindness and clarity, lives a voice that does not want to change. A voice that fears what freedom might demand. This voice is not foreign. It is yours, twisted, silent, forgotten, but yours. It speaks in the tone of self-sabotage, in the subtle cruelty of your inner dialogue, in the decisions that pull you back just when you're about to break through. This is your inner tyrant, and it does not rule with rage. It rules with fear. It hides behind logic, perfectionism, moral superiority. It wears the robes of virtue, of strategy, of protection. And all the while, it keeps your soul in a box. Safe, predictable, powerless. You were not born with a tyrant inside you. You were born whole, unshaped, wild, divine. But life carves us. The world whispers lies in the form of love. It teaches you that control is safety, that obedience is goodness, that silence is peace. And in your hunger to belong, you adapt. You shrink. You tighten the leash on your own vitality. You punish the parts of you that rebel. You exile the voice that asks for more. Over time, you build a structure inside yourself, a castle of reason, a prison of approval, a throne for a false king. He is not loud. He does not scream. He speaks in shoulds and musts, in disappointment and delay. He tells you that rest is laziness, that softness is weakness, that your desires are dangerous. And you believe him, because he sounds like the voice of maturity. But he is not your wisdom. He is your wound, pretending to be wise. Carl Jung warned us that the greatest enemy is not the external tyrant, it is the unintegrated, inner authority that governs from the unconscious. This tyrant is not evil in the way we imagine. He is the archetype of the rigid father, the shamed masculine, the protector turned jailer. He believes he is saving you from the world, but in truth, he is saving the world from you. From your rage, your chaos, your tenderness, your radiance. He believes control is love, but control is never love. It is fear disguised, and fear, when given power, becomes tyranny. You cannot liberate yourself until you know the shape of your jailer. You cannot integrate what you cannot face. To meet your inner tyrant is not to destroy him. It is to see him fully, to strip him of his throne, to kneel beside him, not as an enemy, but as a mirror. Ask him where he came from. He will show you memories, a voice that shamed you for crying, a punishment for speaking the truth, a moment you learned that love could be lost through disobedience. These moments were seeds. The tyrant is the tree they grew into. He grew because you needed safety, because you needed structure in the face of chaos. But he was never meant to rule forever. He is a ghost from a time when survival was more important than freedom. And now that you are grown, he must be dethroned. Not with violence, but with vision. The psyche does not heal through rebellion. It heals through remembrance, individuation. Jung taught is the process of becoming who you truly are. Not by addition, but by reunion, by gathering the fragments of your soul scattered through trauma, shame, and adaptation. The inner tyrant is one of these fragments. He is not the villain. He is the part of you that tried to be strong when you were too young to know how. But now you must become strong in a new way, not through suppression, but through integration, not by dominating the self, but by listening. The inner tyrant fears what he cannot control. So show him that truth cannot be controlled, that the soul cannot be caged, that real strength is found not in rigidity, but in presence. There is a deeper self buried beneath the tyrant's rule, a self that knows when to surrender and when to roar, a self that moves with purpose but without panic, a self that holds both chaos and order in the same breath. This is the self Jung wrote of, the inner king in the sacred center, the source of wholeness, and he does not need to rule with fear. He leads with knowing, with stillness, with flame. But the self cannot emerge until the tyrant is unmasked, until you name the voice that punishes your softness, until you see the hand that pulls you back from your own transformation and say, I see you, but you no longer speak for me. This is not easy work. To confront the tyrant is to confront the identity you've mistaken for protection. It is to feel the grief of all the parts you've silenced in the name of being in control. But grief is sacred. It is the price of wholeness. It is the passage between imprisonment and freedom. You will weep for the years you lost, obeying his voice. You will ache for the joy you delayed the rest. You denied the peace you postponed. But in that ache, something ancient returns. A memory of what you were before you were managed. A glimpse of what you could become without the bars. And from that place, you begin to live. Not as a subject of your inner tyrant, but as the sovereign of your own becoming. You are not who you think you are. You are not who you think you are. The name you repeat, the story you tell, the face you see in the mirror each morning. And these are fragments, echoes, projections, carefully arranged like a mask upon your psyche, shaped not by truth, but by survival. You were never taught to see yourself. You were taught to perform, to be acceptable, to be rewarded, to be small enough to fit into the narrow expectations of a world terrified of the wild soul. And so, piece by piece, you built a persona, what Jung called the mask for the world, a necessary illusion, a costume stitched together by praise and punishment. But beneath that mask, the self watches, ancient, untouched, eternal. It waits patiently like a buried flame. For the day, you will remember who you truly are. Not the version they applauded, but the truth that trembled beneath your skin all along. The greatest lie you were sold was that you are singular, fixed, finished. But the psyche is a constellation, a living mythos, a labyrinth with countless doors. Within you live gods and beasts, saints and sinners, kings and outcasts. The archetypes are not fantasies. They are inner patterns of power and purpose. You are not one identity, you are a multitude. And each mask you wear hides another layer of meaning beneath, but you cling to the mask, because without it, you fear becoming no one. You fear the abyss of not knowing, and yet, it is precisely in that abyss that your truth waits to be born. The unconscious does not care for who you pretend to be. It does not speak in the language of roles or reputation. It speaks in symbols and dreams, in the trembling of the soul, in the dead of night, when the mask slips. It sends you nightmares when you ignore your pain. It whispers through your body when your mind refuses to listen. It conjures chaos, not to punish you, but to shake you awake. Because the life you built on falsehoods cannot hold your truth forever. It will crack. And when it does, the fragments will become your initiation. You will not rise through comfort. You will rise through the fire. The shadow is born the moment you disown part of yourself to be accepted. The moment you were told, "Don't be so sensitive. Stop crying." That's not ladylike. Boys, don't do that. Be strong, be quiet, be less. The moment you took something sacred within you and locked it away, hoping to be loved in return. But the shadow does not disappear, it waits, and the more you repress, the more it hungers. Until one day you find yourself haunted by your own reflection, your jealousy, your rage, your neediness, your grief. You call it weakness, but it is a messenger. You call it shame, but it is a lantern. The shadow is not your enemy. It is the part of you that still wants to live. To meet the shadow is to walk into the dark cave of the self, of the place every hero must go. This is not metaphor. It is Mytha's map. You must go down into your pain, into your forgotten memories, into the voice you silenced to keep the peace. You must face the parts of you that disgust you, terrify you, revolt you. And in doing so, you find something astonishing. The monster you feared is a mirror, and behind the teeth is a truth you abandoned long ago. It is not there to destroy you. It is there to set you free. Freedom does not come from self-improvement. It comes from self-remembrance. You cannot become yourself by polishing the mask. You become yourself by taking it off, by breaking the spell, by saying, "This is not me. This was never me. This was who I became to survive." And then, in the space that opens, something sacred stirs, the self. The one who was never broken, only buried. The one who does not need validation, because it is rooted in reality. The one who does not seek permission because it remembers its own name. You are not who you think you are. You are older than the world's language, deeper than its wounds. You are a vessel for something vast. Call it soul. Call it self. Call it God. But it cannot awaken while you cling to the illusion of control. It cannot rise while you cling to the need to be liked, understood, admired. You must die to the person they taught you to be. You must burn the scripts, the polite smiles, the hollow apologies. You must grieve the loss of your false self like a funeral for an old skin. And from the ashes, you will rise not perfect but present, not polished but whole. This is not the end. This is the threshold, and beyond it lies the life you were meant to live. A life not dictated by fear or performance, but guided by inner truth. But it can't be walked wearing the old face. You must leave it behind, like a serpent shedding its skin. The self does not negotiate. It waits, and now it is calling you, not to become something else, but to remember what you have always been. So answer. Not with words, but with action. Step into the fire, into the forest, into the forgotten chambers of your soul. Because everything you have ever searched for is already inside you, buried beneath the illusion of who you think you are.